B-29 super fortresses ready to bomb.
A pale, false dawn shimmered across the Formosa Strait.
These Navy films show the planes being hoisted to the hangar deck, 25th December.
It was 3:47 a.m.
The first operational flight of the B-29 to be shown in film.
May 17, 1945, when 8 A-26 attack bombers skimmed the waves at low altitude. In the lead, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hutchcraft carried a nose packed with 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns fused into one focused stream of fire. When the triggers dropped, a Japanese destroyer seemed to split apart in seconds. Tonight, we reveal how a paperwork accident reshaped naval warfare. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's chapter is even more shocking. The story of the 8-gun A-26 did not begin with a grand vision, but with clerical chaos. In late 1943, Douglas Aircraft's modification facility in Baltimore received 2 separate orders that contradicted each other outright. One command demanded clear-nosed aircraft for high-altitude precision work. The other insisted on hardened, gun-packed noses for brutal ground strikes. Engineers stood frozen between paperwork that pulled the aircraft in opposite directions. Most factories would have chosen one option, ignored the other, and moved on. But engineer Harold Friedman refused to waste the opportunity. He believed firepower, if focused instead of scattered, could carve a hole through enemy doctrine. American attack planes traditionally spread their weapons across wings and pods, creating multiple streams of fire. It looked intimidating, but the damage scattered as well. Friedman proposed concentrating every forward-firing weapon into one tight cluster. 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns would share a single housing, aligned so their streams converged into a fist-sized zone of destruction. This idea sounded extreme, even reckless, yet the math favored it. At close range, rounds would pour into plates, wiring, gunners, bridge crews, and deck seams, faster than any damage control team could react. Internal memoranda show executives worried the recoil might shake the aircraft apart. The arrangement created nearly 5,000 pounds of backward force, but test benches proved mounts could be reinforced. The ammunition load limited sustained fire, but those seconds were enough. Barrel heat spiked, but crews would not need long bursts. Friedman's proposal was approved quietly, without ceremony. The nose assembly arrived looking almost plain, yet inside lurked a tool that would change the Pacific. Engineers noticed something eerie during tests. The airframe slowed mid-burst as if grabbed by an unseen hand. That was the moment they realized they had built something far more powerful than the paperwork ever intended. When the first test aircraft carrying the concentrated nose guns arrived at Eglin Field, Florida, curious officers gathered along the shoreline to watch. The target was an old destroyer hull anchored in the shallows, stripped of weapons, but still armored with naval steel. Captain Donald Kirkwood lined up his approach at 280 miles per hour, descended low, and squeezed the trigger for just 3 seconds. Observers went silent. The tracer pattern looked like a glowing rope, hammering one section of the ship until smoke billowed in thick, scorched plumes. When inspection crews boarded the target after the run, they found deep punctures, shorn wiring, cracked bulkheads, and ruptured pipes. Fire suppression pumps had failed instantly. It was not damage. It was dismantling. Reports traveled fast. General George Kenney studied photographs and demanded 50 aircraft immediately, calling the design a revolutionary improvement. Engineers noted recoil so heavy that pilots could feel the plane drag backward. Floor panels vibrated and rivets rattled, yet no cracking appeared. Maintenance crews reinforced mounts, braced frames, and realized they were supporting something new. A weapon that punished steel faster than crews could react. Japan had no clue this configuration existed. Intelligence documents reveal that enemy planners still expected scattered wing guns and slow torpedo runs. Their training focused on maneuvering between passes, but this weapon needed only one. The secret reached combat units quietly. The 3rd Bomb Group received a dozen modified A-26s for evaluation in the Southwest Pacific. Pilots were briefed on approach angles, burst timing, and escape procedures. Veterans who flew older aircraft began whispering about the blast pattern, describing it as a cone of death. When early missions returned with gun camera footage showing bridges collapsing and deck plates folding, even the skeptics fell silent. The Pacific theater was about to feel something sharp and unstoppable. The combat debut of the 8-gun nose arrived before sunrise on October 11, 1944, near the harbor at Weiwok. 3 A-26s roared in at low altitude, hugging the coastline to avoid early detection. Their target was the destroyer Shiranui, tasked with evacuating trapped troops. Lieutenant Harold Grayson rolled into position, throttle forward, and steadied his aircraft against the choppy morning air. At 600 yards, he squeezed the trigger, and the concentrated stream of .50 caliber fire struck the destroyer along its waterline. Sailors scrambled, but the ship's primary communications vanished in the opening seconds. Grayson continued his run until 200 yards, then pulled up sharply as his guns finished chewing through the forward superstructure. Reconnaissance photographs taken minutes later showed the Shiranui listing hard, her bridge reduced to twisted metal. Survivors recalled that officers on deck simply disappeared as the rounds laced across plating and support beams. Below decks, fuel lines ruptured and electrical panels exploded. Fires spread too quickly for damage control teams to respond. Within 4 minutes, the ship rolled and sank stern first, leaving survivors stunned at how little warning they received. Word spread across Japanese naval channels like wildfire. Reports described an American aircraft that could shred ships without torpedoes or bombs. Defensive manuals, which emphasized concentrated anti-aircraft fire, suddenly felt obsolete. Commanders issued emergency directives to disperse formations and avoid direct engagement. Veteran gunners admitted they barely had time to swing their barrels before the attacking aircraft had already passed over. The psychological effect rippled outward. Sailors began to whisper that assignment to destroyers was now a doomed posting. Recruit morale plummeted as rumors exaggerated the weapon's power. Meanwhile, Allied pilots reviewed gun camera footage, watching steel bend and break in seconds, and realized they were witnessing a turning point in naval warfare. After the Shiranui vanished beneath the waves, intercepted communications revealed growing fear inside the Imperial Navy. Officers began logging confused requests for clarification. Were these attacks torpedo runs, new bombs, or something else entirely? The truth became clear when additional destroyers reported similar patterns of sudden loss. Bridges shattered in seconds, steering jammed, fires erupted along cable corridors before damage crews could even unclip gear. Fleet headquarters responded with a hurried directive ordering ships to increase spacing to prevent multiple vessels being engaged at once. Smoke screens were declared mandatory, though few believed the haze would be enough. Inside briefing rooms, frustrated advisors debated countermeasures. Some argued for more armored superstructures, but production limits made that impossible. Others wanted heavier anti-aircraft guns mounted higher, but barrel elevation could not match the speed of low-level passes. Most chilling of all were training reports showing that simply seeing the tracer stream caused crews to panic. Sailors repeated rumors of an American aircraft that carved ships apart like timber. Meanwhile, American pilots refined tactics. They learned that attacking from the beam produced catastrophic internal flooding. They discovered that firing on the downwind side of the target increased the spread of smoke and flames. Squadron logs described the weapon as a scalpel, not a hammer. No longer were multiple passes required. The outcome was locked within seconds of trigger pull. Rear Admiral Shigeru Fukudome studied fragmentary reports and admitted their armor advantage had evaporated overnight. Destroyers, once the aggressive backbone of Japanese tactics, suddenly looked fragile. War diaries speak of captains pacing their bridges, knowing their orders demanded engagement, yet quietly fearing the first glint of tracers on the horizon. Navy planners rehearsed maneuvers, wrote new doctrine, and held emergency drills, but none addressed the core truth. The battlefield had changed, and the enemy had rewritten the rules. In the early hours of January 17, 1945, a Japanese convoy pushed through the Formosa Strait, hoping darkness would hide its movement. 4 destroyers formed a protective screen around transports loaded with reinforcements. But Allied intelligence had already intercepted their radio traffic. 12 A-26 bombers launched from Clark Field under limited moonlight, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hutchcraft led the formation, scanning the glimmering horizon for silhouettes. When his bombardier called visual contact, the aircraft dropped to wave-top height. The convoy's first warning came from the bright streaks of tracer fire cutting across the darkness. Hutchcraft targeted the lead destroyer, Hatakaze. At 800 yards, he opened fire, watching sparks erupt along the ship's bow. In seconds, the bridge collapsed, and flames shot from shattered compartments. A sudden flash midships signaled a magazine detonation. The forward section folded, water rushing in through hundreds of perforations. The vessel tore itself apart, sinking in less than 2 minutes. Wingman William Driscoll rolled onto the second destroyer, Asakaze, as it attempted a desperate turn. He held the trigger for 4 seconds. Tracers ripped across deck guns and tore into internal spaces. Crew members abandoned stations, smoke billowed upward, and the ship lost propulsion almost instantly. It drifted helplessly until it capsized. A third destroyer tried to lay smoke, but the glowing stream of fire cut directly through the cloud. Lieutenant Robert Caldwell aimed along the waterline, each second adding dozens of holes. The stern lifted as the bow plunged, screws spinning uselessly in open air. The fourth destroyer attempted radical zigzags, but the attackers simply flew closer. Commander James Patterson fired at 150 yards, detonating fuel and ammunition in a blast so violent that survivors later described the hull vibrating like paper. The ship broke amidships and vanished into the dark, leaving only oil and fire behind. 10 minutes had shattered doctrine, morale, and the convoy's mission forever. In the aftermath of the Formosa Strait ambush, Japanese admirals searched desperately for sanctuary. If open water offered no safety, perhaps ports could. Harbors bristled with layered anti-aircraft guns, lookout towers, and searchlights. Destroyers anchored beside repair cranes, confident that shore batteries could swat low-flying attackers. But by late May 1945, the 8-gun A-26 variant had already proved that even fortified anchorages were vulnerable. Dawn raids became the weapon's specialty. Pilots hurtled in at 50 feet, throttles pushing past 300 miles per hour, tracing wake lines like knives drawn across glass. The attack on Keelung Harbor exposed the illusion of sanctuary. 12 A-26s swept into the bay just as crews prepared breakfast. Smoke rose from galley vents when Major Russell Anderson lined his sights on the destroyer Momi. He opened fire at 1,000 yards, and the glowing stream carved a path from bow to stern. Fuel ignited instantly. Magazine lockers cooked off. The vessel rolled against its mooring lines, tearing them free as it capsized. Shore batteries roared back, but their gunners saw only blurs slipping between buildings and smokestacks. Damage reports listed 5 additional escort vessels crippled or sunk. Dock workers fled, terrified by the noise. Crews scrambled across decks, unable to locate targets before the aircraft vanished behind warehouses. Harbor smoke billowed and clung to the water, masking burning ships like massive funeral pyres. Strategists realized buildings themselves became shields for attackers, blocking anti-aircraft fields of fire and forcing gunners into blind arcs. Japanese commanders attempted emergency doctrine revisions. They demanded night-only movement, increased spacing, and rapid departure once repairs ended. None of it mattered. Rumors spread in mess halls. The American gunplanes could shred armor as if it were canvas. Morale fractured. Some sailors refused to sleep below deck, fearing flames would trap them. The harbors meant to protect them had instead turned into metallic coffins waiting for sunrise. For decades, Japanese destroyer doctrine relied on the cover of night. Darkness had always been their ally, masking approach routes and confusing attackers. But by June 1945, that final comfort began to crumble. The 8-gun A-26 variant gained a new edge: radar guidance. With SCR-720 airborne intercept equipment installed, pilots no longer needed eyes on target. Operators could detect ships at distances once thought impossible, tracking convoys across open water like hunters following footprints in sand. Crews trained to listen for range calls rather than squint into voids. It marked the moment darkness flipped from shelter to snare. The first radar-directed strike came on June 12th, when Lieutenant Colonel Edward Brennan found a convoy evacuating troops under moonless skies. He descended into total blackness, trusting the radar operator's countdown. When tracers burst forward, the attack turned night into chaotic daylight. Survivors later said they never saw aircraft silhouettes, only blinding streaks tearing bulkheads apart. Deck guns aimed wildly, shells splashing water far from the attackers. The psychological toll became severe. Officers who prided themselves on calm command found their hands shaking. Sailors reported phantom engine sounds at night, convinced attackers lurked just beyond the horizon. Sleep became scarce as every distant rumble sounded like death approaching. Training bureaus tried to reassure recruits, insisting tactics could adapt, but every new directive sounded hollow. Radar tracking meant evasive maneuver patterns no longer mattered. Smoke screens, once clever diversions, only highlighted engine heat under scanning beams. By late June, Japanese surface operations dwindled. War diaries mention captains refusing to depart harbors, citing engine faults that mysteriously resolved after dawn. In the officer clubs, quiet rumors traced a grim conclusion. If the Americans controlled the night, then the war at sea no longer belonged to sailors. It belonged to the glow of tracers and the cold certainty of unseen machinery guiding death through darkness. As the 8-gun A-26 continued its campaign, Japanese planners watched their surface fleet dissolve one hull at a time. Destroyers, once the quick blades of the Imperial Navy, now sat idle or sank too fast to matter. Internal staff studies noted that every lost destroyer consumed the industrial effort of dozens of fighter aircraft. Replacing them was impossible. Worse, American production lines could roll out modified noses, reinforced mounts, and endless belts of ammunition with practiced ease. Each battle widened the industrial gulf, turning attrition into an irreversible slide. Supply officers scribbled frantic charts, showing ammunition shortages and reduced training hours for anti-aircraft crews. Morale charts dipped just as steeply. Commanders tried spacing vessels 5,000 yards apart to avoid multi-ship engagements. Admirals ordered strict night operations, believing stealth still offered protection. Yet radar negated it, and smoke screens invited glowing tracer lines through thick clouds. Officers began filing nervous reports, describing the gun pattern as something that carved rather than struck. Chronic shortages of machine gun barrels, hoses, pumps, and welders worsened damage control. Crews feared deck-level hits because internal fires leapt from compartment to compartment faster than hoses could track. A growing sense of paralysis settled in. Surface fleets anchored instead of patrolling. Escort missions canceled. Training cruises suspended. A navy built on aggressive torpedo tactics found itself pinned behind concrete. Meanwhile, American pilots drilled new methods. They learned to slow bursts for armor, quicken them for decks, and sweep fuel vents deliberately. Squadron notes describe the weapon as an executioner, ending voyages in seconds. In officer mess halls, captains whispered the same quiet truth. Courage alone could not face concentrated fire delivered from aircraft faster than orders could be shouted. The ocean, once arena, had become a trap of steel and fear. By July 1945, Japanese surface forces had nearly vanished from contested waters. Staff officers quietly admitted that destroyer operations around the home islands were no longer viable. Plans for defense against an invasion imagined fleets racing to disrupt supply lines, but the 8-gun A-26 had already removed that piece from the board. Post-war assessments revealed that one aircraft, flown well, could achieve what once required entire squadrons. Analysts described it as a shift in arithmetic, not merely technology. It demonstrated that concentrated fire, applied with speed, could dismantle armor doctrine built over decades. The weapon became a blueprint for future gunships, influencing aircraft in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Yet the cost lingered. Pilots spoke decades later of the sights no briefing prepared them for. They recalled watching bridges vanish in flame, sailors tumbling into wakes, and compartments blooming with fire. Psychologists noted elevated stress among those who flew low-level strikes, forced to witness the destruction they created. Veterans gathered in reunions, driven by pride and burden. Some whispered that victory felt sharp, edged with memory. Museums today display the 8-gun nose beside shattered fragments of recovered plating. Placards explain its efficiency, but visitors linger on the photographs. Japanese naval archives, now open to study, describe the aircraft with quiet respect. Their exhibits emphasize how the weapon shattered long-held assumptions and forced a reluctant pause in surface strategy. In the end, the 8-gun A-26 proved that innovation, combined with industrial might, could end battles before they truly began. It offered a chilling reminder that courage cannot overcome physics. When veterans speak about those final months, they rarely mention triumph. Instead, they talk about responsibility, the weight of seconds, and the knowledge that sometimes the only way to shorten war is to unleash a force terrible enough to end resistance entirely.